Just a warning, this is not an academic lecture, but rather a pondering about what I find attractive about the prolonged and enduring intersection of contemporary and historical ceramics, and my particular interest in infusing the hysterical into the mix. But first, a bit about what brought me back to the past so that I may exist fully in the present. I knew I was doomed to be tethered to ceramic history from the first time I sat at a pottery wheel. Now, I am not a great thrower even to this day, and I much prefer to hand-build anything harder than a platter or mug, but taking throwing lessons is part of the mix of becoming a ceramics major. My instructor in Vancouver, British Columbia, Don Hutchinson, used to walk up and down the aisles of busily spinning wheels and point out how this piece looked like 18th century something rather, and that looked like something out of the Who's It, What's It dynasty. I think he was being more than a tad generous, as we were all lumpy and bumpy and ham-fisted beginners, but his point was there was something serious to contend with about ceramic history, so the thought of shaking it in pursuit of making something new and original was going to be a very tough go. While some of my ceramic peers did shuck the historical cobwebs and went on to achieve esoteric sculptural success, quite a few of us dug what the past had to offer, so we've been hanging out and drawing from the conceptual shard pile ever since. I highly suggest checking out some upstarts like Brendan Tang, Clint Neufeld, and Christopher Reed Flock to see some of the latest and greatest in historically tinged ceramics that Canada has to offer. Flash forward to graduate school, where my professor Kirk Mangus harbored a deep love of historical ceramics. His brain was like a walking, talking V&A curator, though his own works reflected a love for all things Asian. A master thrower, as well as sculptor, he loved to talk pots and their elaborate histories as if they were characters from Post's page 6. All of a sudden, the actual people history that went along with the pot history became just as interesting and relevant, and I was hooked from that day on. He also appreciated a good injection of humor in his studio practice, and I came to greatly appreciate the wry references to both the past and present he incorporated into his own wares. Many hours in the Kent State Library poring over the oversized books about Chinese ceramics led me to first fixate on the wares of the Qing dynasty. Note, in the spirit of no stone left unturned, there would be many more historical ceramic legends to come and infiltrate my work, but back then I was laser focused on Qing as my first rite of passage into fusing hysterical and historical. At about this time, I also discovered and received what I thought was a cosmic high five from the likes of California funk artists such as Michael and Magdalena Frimkiss, whose interest in and use of historical Asian wares served as a foundation on which they built some zany pieces. It should be said that they loved to dally in ceramic histories from around the world that resulted in a most expansive collection to explore. Subvert, subvert, subvert became my motto as I researched detail after detail that would have to be considered in the remaking of a Qing masterpiece. There were shapes and forms, imagery and graphic layout, and symbolism to consider. And not only that, the history of what was going on in the country at the time of the original making of the pieces was something to factor in as well. It is amazing the saccharine sweet peonies, fluttery butterflies, lilting lovely color palettes, and could grace the faces of such elegant pots. Meanwhile, the brute force of armies, abdication, assassination, and more could actually be plaguing the people at the same time. No ho ho, these pots were not just another pretty face, and I love the idea that the forces of serene versus sinister, placated versus plundered, amiable versus abominable could all at once be at play here. Digging into the physical foreground and biographical background of a historical pot is a lot like going to a smorgasbord of options and opportunity. The PowerPoint presentation I give when lecturing on my own work is actually called A Girl's Gotta Eat. It multitasks intense entendres, as is maybe the case with other historical pot pirates who also love gorging themselves on a feast of potentials in hopes of producing fabulous hybrid bodies of work. Really, my next show should be called Then is the New Now, as the sculptural wing of my work is still, many years later, laden with references to pots of the past. But whereas I once foraged around on my own for a reason to root around in the pottery past, I now find that there is strength in numbers. Ceramics as a practice can be broken down into many fractured factions. We make pots, we put them in all sorts of kilns and take them to all sorts of temperatures. We call it functional, non-functional, craft, fine art, sculptural, and why, even conceptual. I like a lot of it just fine, but it comes as no surprise that I am partial to the tribe that takes from the past and pairs it with the present. Furthermore, I like it a lot when artists do so unapologetically. from the pivotal works of Canada's Greg Pace, whose precision-made and strategically positioned profiles of pots manifest new positives at a seemingly negative space, to those of ceramic star Roberto Lugo, whose vessels mine the likes of European ceramic traditions, only to be pepper-farmed with critically relevant messages inspired by our prickly political times. Indeed, there is something for everyone. Needless to say, the contemporary company that me and my pots keep is filled with ceramic freaks and geeks. Whether they have heard of, seen, let alone developed a fondness for my own work, I am drawn to our similar missions of regurgitating, regenerating, and rerouting our physical trajectories into future art histories. Some I have had the pleasure of meeting in person, like the Manga Meets Bing Brendan Tang, as I mentioned before. Many I chat up with frequency via ye olde social media. Others, well, they'll always be mythical creatures making masterful things up there in the ether. Grace and Perry, you know I love you. Not that the ceramic math that goes into making a successfully derived pot is simple or governing among the heroes I covet, but there might be a bit of a leveling equation that can enable said success. Again, a generous pottery, if not obsessive interest in a pot's origin seems par for signing up for the course. The country it calls home, the culture of the time in which it was made, its functional intent, the type of clay, the choice of firing, the decorative layout and symbolisms, and graphic systems are just some of the hooks that have to pull at the heart and mind before the hands of subversion ensue. Artists Walter Ostrom, Matt Nolan, Ann Agee, Beth Cattleman all come to mind as they complete this mission oh so well. Then there is the other end of the spectrum to deal with. More specifically, what is the message of today that one wants to tease out and pair with a piece from the past, and how does one merge the two? The current political, financial, and Harvey Weinstein-ridden times are examples of hot topics that I'm constantly looking to thicken my ceramic batter. Panning the camera back somewhat, some of the other works that I make focus not so much on individuals and their actions, as there is just not enough orange underglaze to capture all that Donald Trump has done. But rather, these works try to invoke a general feeling of social and political unease that seems to be seething and seeping through the fabric of our lives. Still, there are some works of mine that pan back even more simply to poke around the silly, superstitious, and sublime parts of pop culture. Think Hello Kitty, Lucky Cats, sports stars, and their sport cars. My butterfly net is a big one, and there is no prey that is too small or too tall to capture, convert, and potify in hopes of garnering a good and sometimes cathartic laugh. Again, not that I would ever align myself with the insane greatness of Grayson Perry, but I am in constant awe of the narrative mashup he is able to both coordinate and orchestrate on his vessel's surfaces. While his visual information and iconography use is at once so stacked and almost overwhelming to untangle, by integrating into each piece a strong moral message, he is able to bring us back from the brink of stimulus insanity he so often leads us up to. For that reason, he gets a 3-star Michelin ceramics rating in my books now and forevermore. Pots aside, I would like to make mention of a few other ceramic artists who consistently rub shoulders with the past, but whose works reach well beyond the vessel. While their works vary greatly from each other in finished form, they occupy a more conceptual space where forms and ideas are broken down and then built up into challenging arrangements of form and information, still with history acting as ghostly glues of sort. Colleague Paul Machu, who lectures at Emily Carr University of Art and Design in Vancouver, holds all sorts of history hostage with his multitude of works, but it was his stacked plates and French Sèvres-inspired garniture sets that first intrigued me. So often ceramics is a one-piece pony, and that we often view work one piece at a time. One cup, one saucer, one vessel. With regard to Machu's stacked plate works, forms, narratives, and imagery literally spill over and onto themselves in rather orgasmic fashion, or they are slathered across the verticality of interlocking garniture sets. The motion and fluidity of these works is visceral to the point that it transforms what we often think of as a static object into completely animated representations of history that demand to be digested in new and completely different ways. Jeffrey Mitchell of Colorado also has a voracious appetite for consummating historical wares and conceptual thought to produce a cacophony of objects and installation pairings. It was actually his remakes of some of the ceramic world's strangest pieces that also gave me the green light to do the same. crusty English poodles, impossible pasta pots, and severely subverted Staffordshire scenery read as once as a mashup of horror show victims and Victoria's comeback kids. Every time I come across his work online or in person, the Ghostbusters movie line, "I've been slime," comes to mind. But with Jeffrey's work, the line is always, "I've been sublimed." Charles Craft of Washington State is both mercurial and controversial in his own ceramic craftiness. Please excuse the pun. If the ceramics world is jokingly misaligned with, as a friend and sculptor once put it, a hippy-go-lucky, patchouli-filled potluck dinner with a Joe Jackson soundtrack, then Craft is that dark horse who lures you into the corner for a looky-loo at what ceramics can also be. Object-oriented are his works, yes, but it is the subject matter that his largely blue and white themed endeavors explore that is breathtakingly macabre. Kim Jong-il, Hitler, Charles Manson, and yes, even Amy Winehouse are frequent cast members starring in his works, and death seems to surround, or rather enshroud, so much of his wares. Please do take the time to explore his Disasterware series and grave-digging shovel heads. Some of his works even contain human bone ash that has been incorporated into clay bodies. Krafft. Viewers beware. My final nod goes to Texas-based but worldly plays Jennifer Ling Datchuk. She, as an artist, very much places her own physical self, not only in the making, but actual presentation of her works. Her Asian history meets ceramic gestures to produce works that are part object, part performance, and part photoconceptual. While her works make many nods to all sorts of ceramic traditions, like many of us, she lends a lot of her practice to exploring the ubiquitous blue and white wares of both Asia and Europe alike. Only instead of limiting herself to representing her thoughts and findings in clay alone, the finished works also incorporate the most intimate of mixed medias, namely fragments of her own body. Eyebrows, hairstyles, and even fingernails are just some of these fragments incorporated in challenging yet limitless ways. In this way, Jennifer not only shows us ceramic history, but physically pulls us through it with her in the most subversive and immersive of manners. There are so many more examples and tales of ceramic historical hysteria to wax on about with infectious affection, but I do have to wrap this up. As you traverse the galleries that SOFA and beyond have to offer, look for signs of history. The ghosts are everywhere, and they are rattling their chains with encouraging approval to keep their dreams alive. Thanks so much for listening.